I've even read there's people who contend that there was only 11 that got this. No, it wasn't the 11. It was the 12. They already chose them. That's why I said I don't understand how, because if you just go through your basic English teaching or language teaching, what was it? We go back clear up into, like we said, that's a bad break. And they prayed and said, "Thou Lord," go back into 24. They appointed Joseph and Barsabbas. Forget how far back we went it
23.
Yeah.
26.
It's just speaking of the 12 there. That's all that there was on that. I mean, there's no evidence of the 120 whatsoever. But there were devout men in Jerusalem at this time from every nation. As I was reading along in this, and there were Jews from every nation here at Jerusalem because of Pentecost. And if we remember, this was one of the 3 feasts the Jews were commanded to keep each year under the old law. So there would be many people in Jerusalem at this time. I've heard an estimate from between 1 and 3 million people were here at this time.
Actually, they were there for the Passover and stayed for the time for Pentecost, 50 days later.
But they were required to keep that feast.
That was one of their requirements.
So as devout Jews, they would be very religious, very committed to that. They would be there for that. Verses 6 and 7, now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language, and they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, "Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans?" Noised abroad, or rumored, it spread quickly. Can you imagine at this time, they didn't have TV, radio, or any of telephones, how this would have spread? They were confused at it also. That makes me wonder, as this was noised abroad, and I've read others, how far out was this noise of the wind heard? And
said, "Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans?" Galileans must have been, the reputation was that they were uneducated people.
well, I was gonna, yes, uneducated. I was gonna lay it down as to were they what we would call today blue collar workers, basically. They were the ones that were the laborers. And which I think in that fact, you can't just say that just because they were the laborers, the blue collar workers, that they were uneducated. When I say uneducated, I don't mean that maybe they didn't go to the schools, but why couldn't they have understood the scriptures?
Well, they had to be. They were preached to. I mean, that was the job of the priest, was to make sure that they had scripture. Mm-hmm. What it's saying here is, "Behold, are not all these which speak Galilean," which means that they are what? They're the common people. How are they going to be speaking all these different languages? They're not that educated to do that. Is what the point is there.
Yes, and I was looking at, as you say they heard it all in their own language. The literal translation says dialect. I don't know how deep you want to go into. Some of these regions may have had the same language, but had a different dialect, and there is a difference. I know for an instance, and I've I remember talking to one lady, I can't remember where she was from. I want to say Guatemala, but I'm not exactly sure. But I do remember she spoke Spanish, but the Spanish they spoke in her home country was slightly different than Mexico's.
Yeah, from down south to north to Wisconsin, there's a big difference in dialect. I mean,
Now, when I say dialect too,
you mean the way you talk, the way you say the word.
I'm not meaning, what I want to say here. Dialect as being, there'll be certain words that are different.
Okay, because I used to say, can you carry me into Walmart? Okay, no one here would know, or I'm fixing to go someplace. No one here knows what you're talking about.
Go down in Arkansas, they ask, would you carry me to town?
Yeah,
Yes, Chester.
I believe it was in their native language. I think that's what he's saying here, because you go down and just all these different countries that he's listed down here, they did not speak the same language. They were foreigners, and they did not, but yet they heard it in their native language.
Well, verse 8, I think, like,
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more of that, but also what I'm trying to get at is some of these countries that we will be listing are in the same region, and they could actually possibly have the same language but different meanings in their words, basically. But
like you all is singular, and all you all is plural.
something like that.
It was kind of like America and Great Britain, we speak English, but our words mean totally different things.
Two nations separated by a common language. And that's but the miracle here is also that they did hear in their own language. And in verse 8 then, and how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born. It said these people were dumbfounded that they could hear this, that they were, why would you ask the question one to another, how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? So they were hearing their native tongue, what the apostles were speaking. Verse 9 through 11. Parthians and Medes and Elamites and the dwellers of Mesopotamia and Judea and Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, and Egypt, and the parts of Libya and about Cyrene, and strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians, we do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of God. We have 15 different areas here that is listed. Now there is something I wanted to read, and this is from the commentary of Leo Bowles, and this just struck me as this leans back towards how precise Luke was in his writing and how correct he was in areas and history and stuff. It's a little bit of a lengthy read, but this is just really interesting when I read this. It says the countries mentioned here are in geographical order. The Parthians and Medes and Elamites lived far eastward beyond the Tigris River and the Caspian Sea. The Jews had been scattered for several hundred years. The dwellers in Mesopotamia are mentioned next, and they lived between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Mesopotamia means between the rivers. The Jews had been taken as captives there. The Babylonian captivity was between the rivers, and some of the Jews never returned from that captivity. Next, the Judeans are mentioned because they designated a dialect of southern Palestine as distinguished from that of Galilee. Next in order are mentioned 5 provinces in Asia Minor. They are Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Phrygia, and Pamphylia. Cappadocia is in the southeastern portion of Asia Minor.
Pontus is in the northeastern part bordering the Black Sea. Asia, meaning not the continent nor Asia Minor, but a smaller territory. The Roman province of that name, which included the little countries of Mysia, Lydia, and Caria, bordering on the Aegean Sea and opposite to Greece. Phrygia and Pamphylia were located a little south of the central part of Asia Minor. Egypt is next mentioned, which was in Africa, south of the Mediterranean Sea, and Libya was west of Egypt, bordering the Mediterranean Sea. Many Jews dwelt in all these countries in Egypt as well as Asia Minor. Sojourners from Rome were thought to be Romans who were proselytes or dwelling in Jerusalem for trade. It is sure that sojourners at Rome are included. Cretans were from the island of Crete in the Mediterranean Sea. The Arabians were the Jews who had settled in Arabia. So, on a geographical aspect of this, it was quite a large area that everybody would come into Jerusalem for the Passover. And that covers several areas, but my fascination with that was how Luke had mentioned it in order. He didn't just throw out the names. They were actually in order as he mentioned and wrote them in the book of Acts. And this would denote the diversity of the Jews that were there. I don't know how you would approach that as today, but the diversity, had we something where you had somebody from every nation there, it would be quite different, you know. And I'm not sure at this time how big the Roman Empire was. I'd have to go back and read that or study that. But Rome was considered pretty much the world at that time. I know there were other countries as you read on through Acts. You know, you run into Ethiopia, which is I don't believe Ethiopia ever was under Roman rule. I don't think that Rome ever did attack them. And there's history behind that too that we can get into once we get further into the book. We look into 12, and it says, and they were all amazed and were in doubt, saying one to another, what meaneth this? Again, we see here it is mentioned that they were all amazed. So this must have been quite an event. If it mentions it how many times, or was it 2 or 3 times? It says they were amazed. So it must have been, if he keeps mentioning that, it must have been something quite spectacular to see. 13, others mocking said, these men are full of new wine. What's the first thing come to your mind when you think somebody mocking somebody else?
Make it right.
Making fun of somebody. Why do people mock other people? This is what comes into my mind. So those who mocked or scoffed called them drunk. I've noticed through life that those who mock or scoff at others are usually insecure, or some are just plain mean. You have those people, but usually when you get back to it, they seem to be insecure also. Something they can't explain, so they scoff at it, mock at it. That's my thought. I don't know if that would be the correct thought on that. Verse 14, but Peter standing up with the 11 lifted up his voice and said unto them, ye men of Judea, and all that dwell at Jerusalem, be this known unto you, and hearken to my words. We have here Peter standing up and beginning to address the people here in Jerusalem. Again, I've heard the estimate between 1 million and 3 million people. If you notice here, it says he lifted up his voice so that he could be heard. Peter now takes the lead. He stands up and lifts his voice. If we go back into Matthew chapter 16, Matthew chapter 16 and 19. Christ tells Peter here, and I will give unto thee the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever thou shalt loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Christ is giving Peter the keys to the kingdom in Matthew. I believe this is where he's taking those keys and he's opening the kingdom up. He's starting to, in this sermon, he will be giving you the qualifications it takes for salvation, or let's say qualifications as the requirements, thank you, that it takes to have salvation.
Darren,
Yes.
on this mocking thing, we look at politics today and we see that happen. You take the liberals, they have no real argument or any real reason for what they do. So what they do is they make fun of those that stand against them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're seeing here. They, mocking said these men are full of new wine. They couldn't explain it. They didn't. So they were just going to make fun of it.
Mm-hmm. That would be what it would appear to me. As we saying, I think Peter here, he was given the keys, he was using the keys to open the door to the kingdom. He was going to also, not only was he giving the condition of salvation, he was going to confirm the prophecy that was done throughout the Old Testament of Christ. And, we could spend how many weeks on just going over the prophecies through the Old Testament. But he did hit on some here as we go on. In verse 15 it says, "For these are not drunken, as ye suppose, seeing it is but the third hour of the day." Peter quickly lays to rest the accusation of them being drunk now, and this had been a faceless accusation. We have to remember the reason why these Jews were in Jerusalem. They'd come for the Passover, they'd stayed for Pentecost. These are what we would call devout, very religious, very dedicated men. Think about this. If you are there for 50 days, if you're there for Passover, you stay for Pentecost, is that not dedication? Would most of us stick around for 50 days to do something like this? Of course, we have the opportunity of vehicles to travel now, but
We can't even get people to attend service like that.
that's true too. That's true too. So these, if in my mind, these were very dedicated individuals to be there that long. So as we look into the reason why were the Jews there, they were there for Passover and then Pentecost. Verse 5 tells us about the devout men that we just talked about. And being the third hour of the day, as it's mentioned here in 15, during this Feast of Festivals and the Passover and everything, the Jews would not eat or drink before the third hour of the day. Now, the Jewish clock started at 6 a.m. our time, so the third hour of the day would be 9 a.m. So the devout Jews wouldn't even eat or drink before the third hour of the day, so they wouldn't have had it. Even if they were alcoholics, they wouldn't have had a chance to be drunk at that time of day. And also, if you, where'd that go? Most people, as you read and throughout the Bible, people that get drunk, they do it at night. So, and this was in the morning. So there were, Peter was able to quickly put down this accusation as to them being drunk by the third hour of the day. Now we look at through verse 16 through 21. But this is that which was spoken. This is Peter speaking here. But this is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel, and it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And on my servants and on my handmaids I will pour out in those days of my spirit, and they shall prophesy. And I will show wonders in heaven above, and signs in earth beneath, blood and fire and vapor of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before that great and notable day of the Lord come, and it shall come to pass that whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. Now, if we go back into Joel chapter 2, and we can see some of these prophecies. Start over. I completely lost where I was at there. Joel chapter 2, verses 28 through 30. It says here, and it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. And also upon the servants and upon the handmaids in those days will I pour out my spirit, and I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. And again, if we look into Matthew chapter 27, (27:50 and 51), so Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost, and behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. And if you read on through there, you see where and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and so forth and so on through there. So as we look at this, we see here Peter is just confirming the prophecies that had been written by Joel. But it's also Isaiah 44:3. No, that's not what I was looking for. I'm sorry. Anyway, you have all the happenings that went on through here. I did a lot of reading on this, and I found some writings outside of the Bible that cannot be proven, but the writings were that the sun showed his blood, and the moon showed his blood, and the sun was dark all day. There were earthquakes at that time too, during Christ's crucifixion. But there's a lot of controversy over when they were written, if they were written in the 1st century or the 2nd century as fakes, or what I want to say, fake things, but there are many different writings about what happened through that time when Christ was crucified. But I'm not even going to give you the names of them because I can't prove that they're true. But it was, we see here, I can't imagine if you're there in Jerusalem when Christ was crucified and the graves opened up, people came up, earthquakes. Wouldn't that just kind of get you? I'm thinking people still be talking about it. if you've seen it. And 22, it says, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God among you by miracles and wonders and signs which God did by him in the midst of you, as you yourselves also know." There were many miracles. We do have, there are those writings from people of Christ outside of the Bible that would also prove these things, but we have so many different things here in the Bible that tell us about Christ and his miracles. 23, "Him being delivered by the determined counsel and foreknowledge of God, ye have taken, and by wicked hands have crucified and slain, whom God hath raised up, having loosed the pains of death, because it was not possible that he should be holding of it." 25, "For David speaketh concerning him, I foresaw the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore did my heart rejoice, and my tongue was glad. Moreover, also my flesh shall rest in hope, because that thou wilt not leave my soul in hell, neither," and that should be, would be more properly translated as Hades. I do believe other versions do call it Hades. In verse 27, "Neither wilt thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. Thou hast made known to me the ways of life. Thou shalt make me full of joy with thy countenance." For some silly reason, I didn't write down that scripture in Psalms where that's gesture.
You know, it's interesting to me that all these people say that Christ fell. He fell to set up his kingdom because, and there's more of them in this world than a lot of people think, because his plan fell. But if you go back up into 23, it says that God's plan handed him over. It was God's plan from the very beginning, which totally refused any of that Christ failure. It was God's success. That was God's plan for each and every one of us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that was because he was foreordained before the world was even made.
Another thing to consider, you know, there was over 500 people that saw Christ risen from the dead. Now, that's not mentioned here, I know, but you know that 500 people ain't keeping that secret. They're talking about it. They know Christ was crucified, they saw him crucified, and then they saw him resurrected.
Yes.
And that's 500 besides the apostles and some of the others there. So, you know, there's well over 500 people saw him resurrected from the dead.
Absolutely, and coming back to the apostles speaking in different tongues, all those mentioned. It's one thing I meant to bring out. I skipped right over it here a moment. There are those who say the miracle of the apostles speaking in different tongues were actually in the ears of the hearers because they heard their own language. If that is the case, if that's the case that it was by the hearers, then why were all 12 of them speaking? The miracle was the apostles speaking in the different languages. So the people are always trying to refute what is actually written here out for us to see.
Well, again, like I said, there was how many nations there?
Like, I believe it's 15.
Yeah, but some of them spoke the same language.
That's why I was saying about the dialect. They spoke the same language, but they were hearing it in their dialect. I mean,
Yeah, but, and not to defend that at all, but if God let a person speak in tongues, who's to say that that language couldn't be heard by everybody in their own language? It has nothing to do with the hearing, it has to do with the speaking. And, you know, I'm not saying that's the case, but it very well could have been, because we know that it was a gift of God. God gave the gift, and I totally agree. It's a 12, it even says that. thing we do know about it is it was a language that could be understood.
Yes. I would have to agree with you on that, Chester. It was
Hey,
language.
Darren.
Yes.
Is this your go-to verse for someone else to argue that they can speak in tongues? I know there are denominations today where people like encompass this gibberish and assume that there's people who come, this be the verse that you would, the passage, Acts chapter 2, and really 1 through 12 there, that you would take them to argue that idea.
I do believe that would be one of them.
Right.
When you speak on that, before you brought up, I can't remember exactly where it is, but you know, you have the people that speak in tongues. I want to say it's in Corinthians where you, there's no need of you speaking unless somebody's there that can translate. You know,
Right.
but yet, yes,
I've been around something that a long time ago. I guess they assumed they could, and it wasn't even a language. At least not a language I had heard before, and clearly here you have them speaking in what was a definitive language from, other nations, so I'm just curious.
yeah, they're not laying on or whatever, just jibber jabber.
Yeah,
And I knew a lady that claimed she could do that, or she could jibber jabber.
right.
I said, that's about
But you know,
That's what I was gonna say, these Pentecostals, that's who it is, speak in tongue, it's not a language at all. It's just gibberish. These guys were speaking a language that could be understood.
Yes, absolutely, Chester.
and not only that, and I know it's just gibberish, but let's say it was so, they were speaking in tongues. Well, they're in direct violation of what the Bible says, because it says if no one's there to interpret, you need to keep quiet. So if they're doing what God tells them to do, then they should keep quiet, because there's no one there to tell the people, the hearers, what they're saying. So, if you understand what I'm saying,
What profit is it?
yeah, it doesn't profit anything.
The only one that might profit is the one speaking, just to show off that they do it. But
But they're told to keep quiet.
they're told to keep quiet, yeah.
Well, it's a miracle to someone to be able to do that, in the scriptures that miracles don't exist today. If I were to just randomly start speaking Spanish, German, Russian, I don't know any of those languages. It's not something I just do.
Today, to be able to speak that language, it takes study and time. And
Well, like we know over in 1 Corinthians 13, it tells us that these things are for a time. There's a limit to it. They will end. And he says, of all the gifts, only 3 remain. And love being the greatest of the gifts.
I mean, what good would it be if I was to stand up here speaking in Spanish or whatever language and do the lesson and you couldn't understand me? That's
But in 1 Corinthians 14:6, Paul saying, "Now, brethren, if I come unto you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you, except I shall speak to you either by revelation or by knowledge or by prophecy or by doctrine?" So he's speaking in the tongue, he's trying to relay doctrine, whatever. Whereas these people today, what they're doing is, you can't understand, so what's the point?
To know what
But that would also then back to Paul, look at all his travels. Was he able to speak different tongues in different places that he went? I think you could say yes, because he traveled so far and visited different places. Any other questions? Comments? We're gonna shut it down, because that's all we got today. Thank you for your comments.
Yeah, well,